Hello, I'm Dynasty Amir. So these are the beaches of Liberia, Monrovia, Liberia. You have to come visit.
So when the settlers came, obviously, like you said, there was tribal beefs going on. So the question is, integrate into what? As if people speak on it as if there was already one Liberia.
There was not.
Right. So what are you supposed to integrate
up
to?
Until the boundaries of what is Liberia today were broadly drawn by the 1860s, 1870s, and then reshaped after the Berlin Conference when France and England encroached and took away, and there's documentation of that. When J.J. Roberts became president, the first trip he made was to England, and there the Archbishop of Canterbury gave him the funds after he made a speech to purchase the Galenas, which was a major slave trading area. And so Liberia took it under its national territory and then started attacking, and they gave them a gunboat. Queen Victoria gave him a gunboat to go and stop the slave trading that was going on there. So they attacked there, they drove out the slave traders, etc., etc. Couple of decades later, the British come and they take that whole area back for the crown. Forget the fact that he purchased it using funds that he got from the Archbishop of Canterbury. So, no, there was not one common group called Liberians.
Right.
The tribes here fought bitterly, and I can send you some documentations on the Condo Federation that was at play during the 1820s and 1830s under King Salgoso. They were wiping out entire tribes, one tribe versus the other. That's what Liberia was here. And so in some cases they embraced the smaller tribes, the weaker tribes, and took them in. In other cases they tried to negotiate between the tribes. But what was Liberia is a series of coastal settlements, not this great big territory that we're here. And so when people from up in Nimba say, "Oh, you didn't educate my people," gee, we didn't really have effective control of that area until the after World War One, or World War Two even. So, hello. Yeah. Okay. All right. Then let's meet my son Fabio.
How you doing, Fabio? And we were talking about the misinformation in regards to Liberia.
There's a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, like with any group of people going anywhere, you have good ones, you have bad ones. You have different motivations, you have different life histories, you have different directions, characters, personalities, and that all made up Liberia. For me personally, I look at, and I would have thought with the last 30 years, what we've been going through as a nation, with so many of our people becoming refugees and living in the diaspora or living abroad away from home, that they would see the parallels between their situation and people who were regarded as the dregs of the earth, who were rejected by every society that they were living in.
Black
people,
people,
whether they were free,
right,
or whether they were freed, or whether they were enslaved, they were never considered human.
Right.
And then coming here, what kind of, I would have thought that, having the refugee experience would have moderated some of our views, but instead it seems to have solidified our views. And I look back at some of the early settlers. They came. I saw where you were on Providence Island. Right across from there, there's a parking lot with cars, etc., etc. That used to be a major slave depot. Right, you're standing there, and as the crow flies, it's an area called, I think it's called Ellen Market, something like that. Right there, as soon as you cross the bridge, on your right.
Who was participating in the slave trade? You said slave depot.
All of the rivers and tributaries that flowed into the Atlantic had slave barracoons here.
Okay.
By the time the settlers came, the slave trade was active in this area. It wasn't active
in
Liberia.
This area,
yes.
Okay.
In the 1600s and 1700s, in the early 1800s, when it started to pick up here.
Because the argument is, even though the slave trade was taking place from Mauritania all the way down to Angola, for some reason in this area, present-day Liberia, there was no slavery going on.
That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true.
Uh-huh.
It had its heyday a little bit later than the areas around Angola and coming up to the Bight of Benin, all that area. They started the slaves coming from there much earlier than the area called Liberia, primarily because the area called Liberia was not that populated. Most of the migrations that came into Liberia came in the 16th century, 16th and 17th century. So by the time you got to the 18th century, late 1700s, there were several tribes along that area. Coming into the 1800s, it had just started to pick up briskly. Right after slavery was abolished in the UK, which was 1808, 1807, something like that.
1807. I don't think they were benevolent when they did it.
Yeah, well, that's when they abolished slavery,
Right.
and so that's when the UK officially would stop anybody engaging in the slave trade. So the UK had Sierra Leone, which was also a colony of returnees. And they had the Ghana, Nigeria area, or they were present there. They were not present in today's Liberia, but there were several British traders, European traders, who were trading sometimes legitimate goods, but many of them dabbled in slave trade because slaves were a commodity.
Correct.
And anybody who tries to remove Liberia from that equation is being disingenuous.
Right.
It's every major river. You know, there's ancient maps that show you King Gray's town, King Chief Bob's town, etc., etc., and they all had they traded in slaves, among other things. Liberia, this area got its name from the trade in peppers, alligator peppers, and rice. So they did not come into trading in humans, like I said, until a little bit later. But they used to re-victualize and give provisions, sell provisions to the ships that were trading in slaves. And so slave ships plied these waters up and down from where we're living, where we're sitting right now. Slave ships were quite common. So come the settlers.
Right.
And what we conveniently forget in our history is that there were two groups of white agents that were sent out by the American Colonization Society to buy land. And the first group that did a purchase, and somebody posted the deed.
Right.
In Basel,
I think
the area called Buchanan now.
I think it's in the museum, is it? Did I see the deed in the museum?
No.
Okay, there was
that's not the deed I'm talking
Okay.
about. This one, it's in some collection in a library in the U.S. They purchased from the Basel chiefs and kings in that strip the land where they wanted to settle. But one of the conditions of the Basel chiefs was that the settlers would never interfere with the slave trade. that they would not be touched and they could continue trading in slaves, but the settlers could come and as long as everybody lived happily together, you let us continue trading our slaves and you can come and you can sit over there. And that was put in writing. And that was sent back to the American Colonization Society, who, of course, refused it. Then the other group came up here and traded, negotiated at gunpoint at one point because they were put at gunpoint. And they were threatened.
So we're not that told that part of the story, right?
I wasn't there. They negotiated it. They paid whatever the price was at the time, which today looks ludicrous, but they paid. And they got a piece of land which was along Water Street or so. And when the settlers came to settle on there, they told them, no, you go over there to Providence Island. You've been to Providence Island, so you've seen it. And that deal did not have the continuation of the slave as a proviso. So the ACS, American Colonization Society, accepted that one.
May I interject real quick? All right, so the argument is, since the ACS, American Colonization Society, I guess, assisted, and white men assisted in the establishment of Monrovia, that means that Liberia was colonized. Now, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself or not. If you want to continue, or you want to, but go ahead. Okay.
I mean, yes, it was called the American Colonization Society. It was setting up a colony for free blacks. And this is the distinction. Again, with any group of people, the motivations for being involved in this colonization effort or repatriation effort or whatever you want to call it, emigration of black people of black skin and ethnicity back to Africa, different ones had different motivations. There were the Quakers who thought they wanted to abolish slavery.
Right.
There were some people who felt that free blacks were showing an example to slaves that was causing slaves to aspire to be free. Sometimes some of them were afraid of blacks, some of them hated blacks, some of them really felt sorry for blacks, some of them wanted them to do the missionary thing and go and Christianize Africa. There were all kinds of motivations, and that's true. Not all good, not all bad. You can't categorize the group and say, well, this group, they were all this. That's not true. However it happened, they set up this colony here at Providence Island. In the early writings, that's one of the good things about our history, is that a lot of it is documented.
Where? Because for some reason, it's just, like I said,
well, there's something called the African Repository and Colonial Journal.
Okay.
I don't know if you know about that.
I don't know.
That's it went from about 1817 to about I think 1906 or something like that.
Okay.
And they kept records of everything, what the agents wrote, and I have some copies and I can show them to you.
Oh, please.
I have some originals also.
Oh, wow.
But I don't have the originals here. I've lost too much here in the multiple times that I've had to leave this place.
Okay.
So I don't keep my most valuable things here. But I have, I've gotten reprints. You can get those things now on Google Docs.
Okay.
And I have them reprinted. And it's just dense information of everything. Gives lists of who came, gives entire sermons that were preached in churches in the 1820s, in the 1830s, etc., etc. So everything that I'm telling you is documented. Now, it's easy to sit from your vantage point and say, this is what motivated the people that came here. They came here to do this,
right,
etc. But the empirical evidence is not there.
You want me to tell you an interesting story?
What?
I was doing some research this morning on, was it Robert Finley?
Yes.
You know, so I'm a graduate from the University of Georgia in Athens. Mm-hmm. He's buried in Athens, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And he was supposed to be the president of the school, but I guess he died right before he assumed, or he died at the end of his 1 year he was president and he passed away. That blew my mind because that's where I went to school at, and I know exactly where he's buried because Jackson, the cemetery is pretty much on campus. I just thought that was interesting. But go ahead.
And I know his name. I'm trying to remember his place in history. So it was just a whole bunch of different things happening here at the same time. And I've always been very proud of my ancestry.
Which you should be.
Of course, my grandparents. I grew up with my parents were divorced when I was quite young, and so I spent a lot of time with both my grandmothers who told me stories and our family history. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, all public servants who did different things. They were the first this, the first that, etc., etc. We've got all of that documented. But before my very eyes, when I was born, this is the house that I was brought into as a baby. It was just built. This whole wing was not there. This was the end of the house. It was a much smaller house. By then, they had just opened up this area of Mamba Point.
Okay.
In the 10 years before, when they were building the port after World War II, and we came here to this. So I remember when they were widening the Tubman Boulevard and the infernal traffic while they were paving those streets, building those roads. I remember when a lot of the things that we take for granted as the road to Robertsfield. I remember when it was being built. Before that, we used to go much further through Firestone to get to the airport. So there was a lot to be proud of, and overnight a new narrative started to come up, and it took me by surprise. I was in college in the U.S.
Okay.
At Michigan State.
Okay, what year?
I went to college in 1978.
So you were there with Magic Johnson?
Yes, I was. I sure was.
Uh-huh.
I was there, Magic Johnson, when they won the...
Beat Larry Bird,
when
Indiana
they
State,
won
yeah.
the
NCAA
Big Ten,
basketball.
NCAA.
Uh-huh.
I was there. I was in my sophomore year almost. He was a year ahead of me, and I was there when he signed and went pro. And I mean, they were a common part of. I used to have photos of me and Magic Johnson, and I'm trying to remember the names. It was him, and there was another one. They both went pro together. The other one didn't do very well. But anyway, yeah. So I was there in college, and then all of a sudden a new narrative was coming out. And I was told things about, I was like, that's not my... I didn't see that. I don't know this.
So basically,
what are they talking about?
the America being demonized didn't start to the end of the 80s or like 78. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think there were a few attempts, and you can go back and you can find books, and I've tried to buy some of them whenever I could from antique booksellers. There was one called Top Hats and Tom Toms, where they made mockery of the society here, its aspirations or whatever. But when you go back in the African Repository, for example, and you read the speech that J.J. Roberts gave in 1845 to try to convince the Liberians that independence was the course that they wanted, and he's a fantastic figure in our history, and I don't think any book has been written about him.
And that's the statue.
That man.
Okay, so this is the story that's told in America. He was a mulatto. I don't want to call him out his name. Sellout. That's the story.
Yeah, I mean,
you know.
you can call it what it was, but he was as much as any one person could be the father of Liberia.
Right.
He came in February 1829, and I know this because my Cooper ancestors came on the same ship with him.
Where did the Coopers come from in America?
They came from Portsmouth, Norfolk, and Portsmouth.
Virginia.
Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And he came from Virginia. He came from Petersburg.
Okay.
The ship took off from Norfolk. And he came, and immediately he started trading, and he amassed a wealth. And what happened, that's not really told, but it's there in the records if you care to,
Okay.
to go and do the research about
That's why I'm here.
was he came with his boat frame and his house frame. He came with some money, and he had some trading partnerships, and he started trading and going overseas. And at one point, the American Colonization Society agents used to buy provisions, sometimes from natives, sometimes from traders, whoever. And so he used to sell them things, and then they opened an account with him, and they started owing him. At one point in time, he had more wealth than the ACS, the society here, and the agents were indebted to him. And so that gave him a power, and that's why he elbowed his way and was like, okay, well, you owe me. If I want to call my debts right now, I'll shut down the ACS here, and I'll take over this country. And so he started an agitation. I don't have details, and,
Okay.
and it's written in more flowery language than that. But amongst his friends and the fellow Virginians, they called them, because they were the ones, and started talking about self-autonomy in mid-1830s. And so from colony, Liberia became a commonwealth.
Okay. So was Liberia colonized?
Colonized by whom?
Okay, but by the ACS, working for America, working in the interest of America.
And all of that condenses something that's much more nuanced than all of that.
Right.
The ACS was created by an act of Congress.
Okay.
And it received funding from the U.S. government, but it also received funding from private sources.
Correct.
So it was
like a grant.
The British called it an NGO or
non-governmental,
or charitable
right.
organization. And that's how they dismissed it and said, "Oh, you're just here and you set up something here. You can't call yourself a country." And J.J. Roberts was trading, and it was one of the Liberian traders whose ship was seized. No, a British trader came in, and he refused to pay customs duties in what is my mom's hometown, Edina, Grand Bassa. They had a port, and they had set up things for customs duty. And he said, well, I'm not paying. And he got his government people in Freetown to say, well, he doesn't have to pay. Who are you? You're nothing but a group of people set up here by a charitable organization. We don't recognize your right to impose taxes. So we're not going to pay. So they had seized his ship for customs duty, and it was held in Edina. And so the British in Freetown seized the ship of a Liberian trader, Stephen Allen Benson, who became our second president, seized his ship in Freetown. And this was going back and forth with letters going to the U.S. asking them to intervene with the Crown and Crown Colony in Freetown to tell them, back off. These people do have the right to pay customs duty or whatever.
Now, if Liberia was technically colonized by America at that time, would they have had to pay, I guess, customs? Is that?
If Liberia was colonized by America, then those customs duties would have been going to America, but the money was going from here to America.
Right.
No, it wasn't. So, like I said, the charitable organization,
Right.
it was like a grant.
A grant, right?
They just didn't call it by those terms. So if you sit down and you put it in that kind of terminology, if you look at
So the ACS was a
those-
nonprofit
It
that
was a nonprofit.
whose objective was to find land.
yeah, well,
Oh, no,
was to find a place and help people to resettle.
For free,
So that's
yeah.
what they used to do. So they used to use their money to rent boats and outfit the boats and get provisions and things like that and bring. It was a logistics company, so logistics exercise.
Are you familiar with Habitat for Humanity in America?
Yes.
Now, I'm not trying. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was the ACS similar to Habitat for Humanity?
In terms of the housing part, yes.
Okay.
In terms of the housing part, because they did stuff like that.
Right.
It was a grand scheme that I'm not sure what are good parallels for it. But when the British said, "You're nothing but a group, just a project from a group of philanthropists,
Right.
where you don't have the right to impose any taxes," we had, by then we were in a commonwealth and we had a governor, and that governor was J.J. Roberts. And he said, okay, well, what should we do? And when they communicated to the ACS said, well, the administration is not really interested. And people like to think that of America as one administration. We're living here with Republican, Democrat. They have different motivations and at different times, America had different approaches to Liberia. It wasn't just one, oh yes, this group is like Obamacare.
Right.
The next one comes and says, what? You're doing what? No, Congress is not going to approve any money for this. Next one comes and says, I think it's a great idea. Congress should approve money for this. So that went on. The ACS said, well, we think the best thing is for you to be independent and form your own republic, and then you can levy taxes. So in this time, they tried to put diplomatic pressure on the British for the release of the ship of Stephen Allen Benson, but they sold the ship or burned it or did something. Anyway, it was no longer available. And so J.J. Roberts said, okay, well, then let's go for the independence. And so he made this speech, and not all the Liberians followed and said, oh yes, great, wonderful, we want this. Because some of them were saying, what? And then what will be the role of America? They're going to leave us. They brought us here. Not everybody that came immediately was viable, and even if you say they gave them some land and some provisions for 6 months, some of them couldn't make it. Sometimes a husband and wife would come with their children. Husband and wife would die, the children are there. Or the wife would die and the husband is there with children, or vice versa. Very, very, very many high mortality rates amongst the settlers changed the dynamics of what people were able to do and not able to do when they came here. Some of them came straight from the cotton fields or tobacco fields, having no experience with self-governance or taking care of themselves. Some of them came, like J.J. Roberts, having run businesses of their own, the free blacks. So immediately you had this stratification, economic stratification, the ones who were better educated, who were more exposed, who had some wealth when they came, like my Cooper family, the 5 brothers that came over, they came over with their house frames, they came over with their boat frames, they came over with some money, so they were better off. But my other family, have one who was, living in a Quaker society, so they came to proselytize and convert people to Christianity. I have another part of my family, my grandmother's family, they came over from Georgia as a group of slaves. So they were slaves, and then they sent them to Liberia. So they had no experience with anything else. And then you say, okay, go there, make your way. And that's why I compare it to being a refugee. Because you get, when you're a refugee, you get to a country.
Sorry. Go ahead.
You get to a new place, and you immediately have to find your way. You have to find what am I going to do to be able to eat tomorrow? How am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? Nothing is laid out for you, and certainly nothing was laid out for them. And so that's part of the narrative that gets brushed under if you want to reduce it into a broad stroke of they came and they did this.
That's what it's reduced to, and
it's it's like saying doing that to America,
right.
and you can't do that to America. You can't do that to any place. Just reduce it to one or two sentences that clumps everybody together. I grew up in a more privileged household here in Liberia. Like I said, this house, this is not, don't claim to be the poorest of the poor, but I have many of my relatives that did not have this, and they come from settler backgrounds too. So they're tarred by the same brush as, oh, you all came with, you had all the privilege and you had all the power.
Right.
They didn't.
Okay, so the other broad brushes, the settlers came and enslaved and implemented a system of apartheid. That's the other misinformation.
Yes. They came and they enslaved. The settlers came, and almost every war that was fought here between the settlers and the indigenous people, every war that was fought up until, let's say, 1900, every war that was fought here was either a defensive war on the part of the settlers, that is to say they were attacked, or they were fighting to free slaves who were being sold.
So I have a good friend, Larry. I have a good friend, Professor Larry Davis. You'll love him. He knows the history of Black Americans and their contribution to the planet. He said that the Sierra Leoneans and Americo-Libyans were the original abolitionists in Africa.
Yeah. So there were many wars that were fought where one tribe was about to wipe out another tribe, and one tribe, what they call sued for peace, came to the American settlers and said, can you please help us, or can you please protect us? Some of them were just assimilated into society. And how can you go 200 years and say this person is this? It's not even an ethnicity.
Right.
This person is a settler, of settler ancestry. I have people in my background, of course, among my ancestors who came from Nigeria, came from Freetown. My grandfather came from Germany. He was half Jamaican and half German. Born in 1898 in Germany, grew up there, immigrated to...
Oh, they got it blocked off. The hotel. This is Joseph Jenkins Roberts, the first president of Liberia.
Sugar plantations in Jamaica. How do you look at somebody and say, okay, these ones, you're all this? This is not a race. This is not something that you can even, and just to classify people. These, over the period of history, we've seen a lot of things, but we just went through. In my lifetime, we've been through a war. We've been through a coup d'etat, an attempted coup, and a military regime, etc., etc. And what did we see in the military regime, and what did we see in the war, and what did we see after the coup that supposedly was a revolution between the indigenous and the settlers? It wasn't.
I asked a friend of mine, I said, okay, who was actually fighting, now not the coup, but the first Civil War? or even the coup. I was like, who was fighting who?
Yeah, the Civil War.
Right.
Who was fighting who? Who
Right.
killed who?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Had nothing to do with settler and indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
It was one tribal group versus another tribal group. And they, because the military government that took over after the coup was led by President Doe, who came from the Crown tribe, which is an even tinier tribe than the group of settler descendants. And as he got more and more powerful, he
Started to put his
used the
homeboys on.
military.
And, okay.
Yes, not only he put his homeboys in there,
Right.
but they went out and there was an election that he considered that he stole in 1985. He sent out an attempted coup, attempted overthrow by Kwiwompa, who was one of his People's Redemption Council colleagues. Kwiwompa's coup in 1985, 5 years after the coup, he sent the army up to Nimba, which is where Kwiwompa's tribe is, to annihilate them. They had massacres, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Men, women, children, old, young, were massacred by the armed forces of Liberia, which was predominantly of the Crown tribe.
Right.
Come the war, those are the very same people that formed the core of Charles Taylor's NPFL. The initial core was that tribe that had a grudge, and they came in, they were merciless against the tribe that had been massacring them. So this had nothing to do with settler and indigene.
Right.
Since the coup has happened, and even more since the war, people like myself who have settler ancestry, we just stick to ourselves. I'm not interested in politics. The few who have tried, attempted to get into political life, have not been successful. Fine. I don't need politics to do what I want to do. I retired and came home, and I'm trying to rebuild an agriculture sector. This is my passion. This is something that I really want to do, and this is my home, and I want to see this home develop like it was the way when I was growing up.
But my next question. Before the coup in 1980s, can you tell us, because there's a documentary called The Glory of Liberia, I believe it's called? The Wealth of Liberia.
The Wealth of Liberia.
Can you go into details about that? And then...
what kind of details?
Well, okay, so one thing I love about Nigeria, everything for the most part is Nigerian owned and controlled. Other places I go to, whether it be East Africa, Indians dominate, but even you will say the small businesses are locally owned. Same thing in West Africa. There's a phenomenon here in Liberia I haven't seen anywhere else, where even like the small shops aren't locally owned. From I observe now, I haven't seen all of Monrovia. I could be wrong, but from what I've seen, I haven't really seen that anywhere else.
But who do you think owns the small shops?
Non-Liberians. From what I've seen, I guess Syrians or Lebanese. That's
No, not the small shops. Syrians and Lebanese are in the bigger enterprises.
okay. Well, like I said, I could be wrong.
Small shops, the kiosks, they're owned by the Fula.
Okay.
And different groups of people.
Okay.
But you're right.
Right. Okay.
You're right.
I just seen a ton of Lebanese faces.
Coup, from after World War II and through the Cold War years into 1980 up until the coup, there was such a strong push for Liberianization, for Liberians to own things. I was just reading my grandfather's letters yesterday because we had the funeral of a relative, his niece, and I was reading one of his letters about the politics of the time, and he's talking about going with a proposal for Germans to do something, and President Tubman turns to him and said, "Why do we have to depend on the white man to do everything for us?"
Right. Right.
And he quotes this in his letter.
Right.
Now, I can go and say, "Oh, no, Tubman never said that." What my grandfather was writing to somebody, it was not meant to be brought and put onto Facebook in 2019. But I'm looking at it and I'm like, people need to know.
It's relevant today.
This is
Very
yes,
relevant today.
This
Very
is
relevant.
the mentality of the man that you say did not want. So
And actually coming from a black head of state as well.
that's right.
Yeah, that needs to be.
Tubman, what they want to deny Tubman his role and delegitimize President Tubman because of his firm backing for capitalism in a Cold War era where it was either capitalism or socialism. Socialism was bad. You know that in America you have the Red Scare and that dominated the post-World War II era up until just about the fall of the Berlin Wall, I can say, or the disintegration of USSR into all those states. But as long as the Cold War operated, you were either a capitalist or you were a socialist or communist. Which is the better model? Obviously, as history has turned out, more countries are with a type of social capitalism, a soft capitalism, or socialistic type of government, except the U.S. You go to Europe and they have high taxes, and a lot of things are centralized.
Well, that's why France is going through what it's going through,
yes,
right?
Exactly. But Tubman steered a course and he took sides. Yes, he took sides in the Cold War. But we had to survive as a nation. We started off with America. Now he was going to become a communist when we did not know anything about communism. Because Marx or Lenin or one of them said this is the way you're supposed to go. So yeah, he took sides and he sided with America, and America rewarded him, his administration, the country, with a number of things: the port, the airport, setting up different systems, facilitating loans, etc., etc. Liberia had most favored nation status. We did everything very, very close to America.
Like
Today, people say, "Oh, it was bad," but that's again being disingenuous.
right.
Look back at the times. What were the options for survival as a state? We were still at that time, post World War II, the only independent republic. Ethiopia was independent, but Ethiopia was not a republic; it was an empire. Okay. South Africa said that they were independent, but it was minority rule.
Right.
South Africa. Who else? It was just us.
In Haiti.
No,
In Africa. Okay, in Africa. Okay.
It's just us.
Okay.
Egypt, they went through catharsis somewhere in 1950s. Egypt got their independence, not from a nation, but from British banks. A consortium of banks. That's who gave them their independence, whatever is the case. So, trying to rewrite history and consolidate it, Tubman wanted African unity, and as each country got its independence, he tried to bring them in the fold and advise them, this is how we've survived. There's so many documented texts or records of him and his ambassadors or foreign ministers or whoever going out and telling newborn nations, listen, let's tell you how we did it and how we've managed to steer clear, because there's a whole lot going on out there,
right,
and they will swallow you if you're not helpful. He was admired and looked up to by every single leader in Africa.
Nelson Mandela,
Even Kwame
Nkrumah loved them.
Even Kwame Nkrumah. No, the narrative now is that Kwame Nkrumah was his enemy.
I haven't heard that narrative yet.
Oh yeah.
Is it? Oh no,
yeah.
I haven't heard that one yet.
Because they didn't agree on the formation of the OAU. Kwame Nkrumah wanted Pan Africa, and Tubman wanted and United Africa, which are two different things. Kwame Nkrumah wanted the United States of Africa, and Tubman wanted United Africa. So we should all be united under one umbrella, but as independent nations. So we each run our own thing. Kwame Nkrumah wanted one. He wanted the United States of Africa with him as the head, and that was his downfall. Was he would go and try to sell this, and everybody would be like, yeah, it makes sense, yes, sure. And he would come up here, but I will be the
leader.
But wait, that's fine when you're in Ghana, Benin, Togo, and people know Ghana and they know you. You get to Tanzania, and they've never seen a Ghanaian before, and you come and say, and I will be your ruler. And they're like, no. We didn't get rid of the white man to take you on, you who we don't know. You can't go to Malawi, and I'm just naming countries at random, the Arab nations, and say, this is the way we're going to go, and have it accepted. So it was not very popular, what Kwame Nkrumah was preaching, and it died from its own weight. And Tubman, and what Africa went with was the Tubman model. They call it the Monrovia Group model, which had the majority, 33 out of so many nations. Kwame Nkrumah's group, the Casablanca group, they were 5, and weren't growing anywhere. And then they started fighting among themselves. So by the time they got to Addis Ababa for the formation of the OAU, Kwame Nkrumah was pretty alone, and they were like, we don't want you to be alone. Join us, and let's all work together. And they basically, the story goes that Sekou Touré took Kwame Nkrumah by the arm like this and said, you will sign. And made him sign, by the beginning, at the beginning of the 5 days of the first summit, there was a lot of tension. There were some heads of state that wanted Kwame Nkrumah to be sent away, that Ghana should not be any part of their deliberations. And Haile Selassie and Tubman are the ones who kept it all together until the OAU was formed. Tubman's role is completely delegitimized by nobody else except Liberians. We are the ones who said, no, he didn't do it. It wasn't him.
It's outside forces. It's outside forces too. I would say outside forces as well.
No.
Okay.
Outside forces
No.
don't delegitimize his role as much as internally. So anytime, and I worked for 5 years with the UN accredited to the African Union, and they said, my sister, Liberia is the reason why we have this. So anything Liberia wants, we're ready. But Liberia doesn't ask. Because here in Liberia, we felt, no, we did a wrong thing, Tubman was a bad man, etc., etc. So we started to buy into these negative images of ourselves. Be that as it may, Liberianization was alive and well under Tubman, and it thrived under Tolbert. Any concession, foreign concession coming in here, Firestone had been here since the 1920s, I'm not talking about them, but any new one that came in, whether it was for bone mines, Lamco up in Nimba, the iron ore mines, whatever it was, he said Liberians have to own shares in it. So Liberians, and for Liberians, if they don't have the money, the banks have to lend them the money to buy shares in these companies. And this was the way a certain portion of shares had to be kept aside for Liberians. The banks had to do a certain portion of their lending to Liberians. We had Liberian-owned banks that were friendly in the U.S. right now. There's this movement back towards local banks,
right,
and
credit unions,
community banks and credit unions, etc., where the decisions are made close to the depositors, and then you know people. Rather than having a city bank where the shareholders make their decisions in New York, and you're sitting here and saying, yeah, but my story is different, and like, yeah, well, we don't really care. We care about our bottom line here in New York. So Liberianization was very strong. The private sector was thriving. Political activity was quite hurly-burly all the time, despite the fact that we had the same ruling party for almost 100 years. For 100 years, 102 years, I think, from 1878 to 1980. They say, oh, Liberia was a one-party state. Liberia was never a one-party state. We had multiple parties, but one party dominated. It's like saying America is a two-party country. Well, effectively, we only know of Republicans and Democrats, but there are also their independents. Other different people run differently. You go to Europe, there's not one party. You have whatever. Anyway, so yeah. The narrative surprised me. I woke up one day and I was told, oh, you people were owning slaves.
Right.
I never saw that. So I was like, okay, where? I read the book by this guy called Richard Krasinski. I've forgotten the name of the book. He was some sort of journalist. He came through here in the 70s, and he wrote a book about Liberia. And he said that in the 70s, people who begged in the street were shot in the head by the government forces. I was like, is he talking about Liberia? Because we never shot where? We didn't even know about people being shot. There was no such thing at all. In fact, I was shocked. My first thought when I heard about the coup d'etat by the military people was, we thought their guns didn't have bullets. We never knew them to be, a force for that kind of thing.
I think there was just outside forces that did not want to see a successful black nation like Haiti.
Well, that's exactly it.
Uh-huh.
That's exactly it. And then the story is much deeper than that. And they preyed upon and played upon the sentiments of the radical young people who wanted a more socialist or communist even. The ones who run around calling each other comrade this and comrade that, and I don't know, glorifying what, I don't know.
Right.
Because the first opportunity they got when they got into power was to go the capitalist wholesale corruption, wearing the silk suits and silk socks, etc., etc., etc. These people, this government here, calling, the militants in this government who do all this comrading, give them the first chance and they go for good old capitalist looting and stealing,
Right.
and fraud and all of those kinds of things. But what we did in 1980 was we took away from the haves. We didn't give it to the have-nots.
Right.
We gave it to the people who took. From whoever took, you kept, or you gave it to your...
Which was my next question. What was the objective of the 1980 coup?
Well, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. And yeah, that's a very good question. So I asked this question on the post recently about reacquisition. Because we had viable Liberian-owned industries here. Steve Talbert, Steve's father, had a business. He financed the Rumble in the Jungle with Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier.
Right.
George Foreman.
George Foreman.
George Foreman in
Congo, DRC.
In the Congo.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody is posting Michael Jackson's mom and sister, Latoya. They used to come here in Liberia. They held Liberian passports. Hugh Masekela, Miriam Makeba, all of them lived here. They had their homes here.
People don't hear that.
They don't. And Nina Simone. Nina Simone lived here.
My dad
I went
used
to
to come.
school with her daughter.
My dad used to come here all the time.
Okay. This would what's his name? John Amos from Good Times, those old 70s sitcoms, etc. He had a home here.
Ebony
He had
magazine used to always, and Jet magazine used to always.
Yes. Okay. They just gave us the matches and said, okay, here, blow it up, and we did, and we're in a lot of pain now because the authors of that coup d'état refuse to outwardly acknowledge that they made a mistake or they made mistakes. Their intentions may have been good. They may have wanted to see a more equitable society, and that may have been what motivated some people. Again, as in any situation, you have different people with different motivations. Some people just wanted to acquire for themselves. Some people just wanted, revenge.
Right.
That also played. But in the end, what they did was acquiring all these viable industries. Like somebody said, they used to serve Liberian shrimp in restaurants in New York.
Well, they used to, I guess, Japan export
Yep. Yep.
Liberian seafood to Japan.
Yes. Yes. All over the world. I have no small measure of pride when I see Liberian rice served in a restaurant. Well, there's one restaurant that's giving us the props, that's giving us the credit, in New York at the Africa Center, one restaurant in London, and it's starting to make a name for this Liberian rice that we grow and export from here. We have so many problems doing it, but the satisfaction I get is from showing that it can be done. We used to do it before. Somebody came, busted it all up, and then sat there and said, okay, now what? Our economy has just gone, in stages, declined. So far, I don't know what it's going to take to get it back together again, or get it back moving again. I'm not so much interested in the political dynamics, the way we do politics here, etc., etc. I just want whoever's in charge to start doing the right things for the economy and for Liberians.
Now, as I mentioned before, the Liberia is essentially the original point of return.
Right.
How did it shift to Ghana, and what do we do to get it shift back to Liberia?
Because Ghana just took it's a marketing strategy, and they took the brand, Year of the Return. They took the brand and they ran with it. But it's very interesting. There's very few Liberians that will talk about our history. I think you can count them on one hand.
Exactly.
Without pain and passion. And that includes myself. Without a feeling of, with complete pride. If I put pride in something, somebody will attack and make you defensive. But none of us want to aim. Nobody's history is perfect.
Right.
I mean, which country? My husband is from Belgium. I go to Belgium. I'm going to Belgium now for Christmas. I go to cities that were built on the back of their colonial past in the Congo, which was bloody. It was an atrocity. There were genocidal things that happened in Africa at their hands, and they built their cities, and they're sitting pretty, and the Congo is still not straight.
Right.
So people speak about that king when you're in Belgium. In hushed
Leopold.
tones. Yeah,
Yeah.
Leopold. He was king of the Belgians. He was not king of Belgium. They speak of him in hushed tones, but they don't give back what his excesses built for them. It's theirs now.
Of course not. It's just it happened. Yeah, it's whatever.
But you know, a country that has so much to be proud of, and we're sitting here tearing ourselves apart. No, you can't be proud of that. No, you can't be proud of this. No, you can't be proud. Nothing was ever perfect. So, you know, I take the situation for the settlers coming here. A ship would land with settlers coming in from the U.S. Another ship would come having, they call them recaptives, captured a slaver and free the slaves or the enslaved people that they had, the cargo that was on its way to the U.S. They would intercept the ship, bring sometimes one account from one of the agents talked about 1,000 people.
On one boat?
No,
Okay.
2 or 3 boats
Okay.
that they intercepted that were bringing, and rather than take them back to Angola or
Congo.
Benin or Congo, wherever they were coming from, they brought them and put them here. And the settlers assimilated with them, and they took them. Sometimes they would go from house to house and say, "Can you please take one? You can take a young boy or girl or etc., or this man or this woman." And these people, they took them into their homes.
Right.
You're a refugee. You get to America, whether on resettlement or whatever, or you get to Ghana. How many refugees went there and started fostering less fortunate inner city kids? I want to ask them that. So you were there.
Right.
You were trying to get along and establish yourself as a refugee. How many people did you reach out to and help?
In fact, they kind of segregate themselves from.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes. And so the Liberian settlers are being castigated for having done just that. What would you do? You come on a boat with, I know Dynast, I know Zubin, we all came from the same plantation, we're all in this thing together.
Right.
Why did I not go and embrace Momo over there, who I don't know, and instead I stuck to Dynast and Zubin and the people that I do know, and felt some kinship with and spoke the language, and we've all gone through something similar. We know what's behind us and we know why we're here. And then people say, well, why didn't you educate
Right, let them vote,
the
educate.
indigenous?
Right.
Look, my great-grandmother had an 8th grade education. My grandfather's sisters did not go further than 8th grade. I come from a relatively well-educated family, but there are many children of settlers that did not get an education. Partly because there was no money, or they couldn't afford it, whatever, or they didn't prize education as it is. So putting that story as if, oh, they came here, they found the Holy Grail, they became instant millionaires, and then they started to oppress.
Right. That's
the rest of the people.
that's the story.
That is
In the interest of America.
That is bull.
Okay.
That's just.
They were balanced. Okay, this were after when they came, there was no water. So when they joined hands and pray, this is the oldest well in Republic of Liberia. It was built in 1822. For now, people come. They see that. Okay. You can see it right here. Yeah. They saw it already, but you just haven't talked about it. Yeah. So when people come, we help them with this water and they drink. Water being can be hard slippery, bad time. This is the oldest well in Republic of Liberia.
The oldest well, and they're still producing water.
They're still producing water.
From 1822.
1822. So as we go around, you see, people with the water, they say,
Give them $1.
they want.
If I drink it.
Isn't it? They want. It's not salty. But the Mosorado River, you will not be able to drink it like this. Or the Stoughton Creek River like this, you will not be able to drink it like this.
He said if I drink it, he would give me $1. So you drink it, you get the $1. He had to pay up somewhere.
Okay, so the woman will go in the horse to see.
Okay.
The situation in Liberia that prevailed at the time that the settlers came in.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever read Patrick Borrow's book, beneath the cola forest and the salty sea, something like that.
I haven't, no.
You haven't
No.
seen it? It's available online. I will give you a series of things that you can read and point to some. I mean, information is there.
Right. Just people refuse to research it.
No, but people have a narrative and they've just
They just want to run with the narrative, right?
It's so much more tantalizing than the truth,
Right.
which is less sexy, less. And the fact is that one preacher said recently, have we forgotten what Liberia is and what Liberia has been? Because
Before the first coup. Is that what you're
the
saying?
establishment of this republic by people who had nothing. This is not a wealthy country. This was not America sending their wealth over here. It was not at all. Like I said, there were many years that the ACS didn't even have money to send a ship or to pay for the provisions, as I said.
Well,
You know,
it's a nonprofit.
It was a nonprofit. People got here and they had to fend for themselves. Yet they built a nation, and that nation survived all of the different challenges, internal and external, survives till this day. Nobody else has our history. Nowhere else in the world has a country been set up by black people and survived the way we have. Haiti may be an example, but Haiti has never had a golden year, much less to say golden years.
True.
Like we had. We had a golden era. Okay, which was pretty much the, a good 50 years between after World War One to, well, not after World War One. Let's say after World War Two, 30 years. We had a golden era. We can have it again. It's possible, but one of the first things that we have to do is to look at our past and stop rendering judgment on people.
And that was the question. Last question. How do we move forward? But I think the issue with looking at our past would be, I don't think people want to give credit to certain people.
And that's great. Don't give credit to them. What I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to move us forward is by giving a good example of what can be done.
Right.
And I'm using all the resources that are available to me. I know what my background is, but I can no more help the color of my skin or the parents that I was born to or the ethnic group that I was born to or the country that I was born to than anybody else can. And Martin Luther King said, judge me by the content of my character, not by all of those other things.
Right.
So that's, just showing an example. That's all I can as an individual do, and I have absolutely no aspirations to do anything else other than show a good example and have enough people pick up on that good example or show good examples in their own ways until we come and say, hey, what are we fighting for? You ask one question and then you backtrack off of it.
Which question?
Who won the war, the Civil War?
Well, my question is, I just don't. So, coming into 1980,
nobody can tell you. Who won
that too.
our war?
And what was the
what were we fighting for?
And what was the objective? I don't understand.
Exactly.
1980 coup to present day. What was the objective?
Right.
Right.
None of us know, and we're embarrassed to say we don't know. We sat here and fought each other for however many years, destroyed our country, and we cannot tell you this person. We say this person is the cause, but we were all participating or victimized or whatever it was. Who won the war? And at the point where Liberians, it was not the UN peacekeepers that stopped the war here. It was not George Bush or Kofi Annan or anybody else that stopped the war here but us. We just woke up one morning and said, what the hell?
It was crazy. I was watching a documentary and people were just started hugging each other in the streets.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But we were doing that already. We had brothers in one faction, a brother in the other faction, as any fratricidal war is, and we're like, okay, exactly why are we fighting? And we, the women, and my mom who was sitting here, she's one of those women who said, no more. We stop it. We just stop it. And we stopped it. And we didn't fight anymore. The UN stayed here, the peacekeepers stayed here for 10, 15 years longer than they needed to, because we were not going to fight, and we're still not going to fight. Because one thing we learned from it all is that nobody is winning. All of these, so all the venom that you see and all the anger and the hatred and all of that, nobody is winning from that.
Right.
The only thing that can carry us forward is taking a positive attitude, loving your country and saying, I want to do this for my country. So maybe I'm just being pie in the sky and naive and all of that, but you know, I got limited number, as one of my cousins said, you know, I've got 20 good summers left in me. So
Longer than that. More than that.
Let's hope. Let me make the best use I can of them, and hopefully, you know, something will catch and something will catch fire, and people will say, yeah, this is what we need to do.
In closing, why should Black Americans celebrate Liberia?
We are a part of your history and you're part of our history, because our people left America, but they never, you know, let me tell you an anecdote.
Go ahead. I know it's your birthday, so.
Yeah, it's my birthday.
I know you people here. I don't understand.
Let me just tell you a quick anecdote.
Go ahead.
Washington, D.C., like most of America, was quite segregated, even up into the 50s and 60s. 1953, President Tubman went on a trip to the UN and then to the US, and then he went down to Jamaica and Haiti, etc., etc. While traveling through many places, hotels were segregated and they would not accept black people in there. And so when the US government decided, okay, they were going to give, Liberia was going to establish an embassy. That was done in Tubman's era, that we had an embassy there and an ambassador. And so we had to buy an embassy. He bought the embassy in a segregated white neighborhood of Washington, D.C., so that they would see blacks in that area and in that particular neighborhood. And today, our embassy is still there in that neighborhood. Now it's, you know, it's all moot. But back in the 50s, that was a big deal for black people to be in that neighborhood that was supposed to be segregated. That was before civil rights era and all of those laws were abolished. But that's one of the things. It's a little thing, and it's not even a thing that you will see in history books. Why should they celebrate? Because we are the same people.
Right.
We have the same experiences. We came here, we have other experiences to add on it, but we have that historical DNA in us that joins us. We come from the same thing, the same roots. So if you're going to come back somewhere, it should be here.
Liberia.
Come see what your people did.
Liberia.
And almost all of us can trace, I can take you back to where each of my family members that come from America, where they come from. And say, I look around here, I'm sure I have some family members that I haven't done DNA testing, but just means that we're the same people.
We're the same people.
So
Thank
you're gonna
you.
come. I don't say don't go to Ghana. Go to Ghana by all means. Go to everywhere in Africa. But if you want a story that's part of your story, come here.
Liberia. Absolutely.
Yep.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.